Hi guys, Tip here. So today we are reading Chapter 14 of Ranger's Apprentice by John Flanagan. Walk him around a little, said Holt. Will glanced back at the shaggy pony who had watched him with intelligent eyes. Come on, boy, he said, and pulled on the halter. Instantly, Tug braced his forelegs and refused to move. Will pulled harder on the rope, leaning back in his efforts to make the stubborn little pony move. Old Bob crackled with laughter. He'd be stronger than you, he said. Will felt his ears reddening with embarrassment. He pulled harder. Tug twitched his ears and resisted. It was like trying to pull a horse along. Don't look at him, Holt said softly. Just take the rope and walk away from him. He'll follow. Will tried it that way. He turned his back on Tug, seized the rope firmly, and began walking. The pony trotted easily after him. Will looked at Holt and grinned. The ranger nodded his head towards the far fence of the paddock. Will glanced across and saw a small saddle placed across the top rail of the fence. Saddle him up, said the ranger. Tug clip-clopped decidedly across to the fence. Will looped the reins around the fence rail and heaved the saddle across the pony. Back, he bent down to fasten the straps of the saddle. Pull them good and tight, old Bob advised him. Finally, the saddle was in position. Will looked eagerly at Holt. Can I ride him now? He asked. The ranger stroked his uneven beard thoughtfully before he answered. If you feel like that's a good idea, go ahead, he said. Finally, Will hesitated for a moment. The phrase stirred a vague memory with him, but then eagerness overcame caution, and he put one foot in the stirrup and swung himself nimbly over the pony's back. Tug stood, unmoving. Get up, Will said, drumming his heels against the pony's sides. For a moment nothing happened. Then Will felt a small tremor of movement go through the pony's body. Suddenly, Tug arched his muscular little back and shot straight into the air, all 4 feet leaving the ground at the same time. He twisted violently to one side, came down on his front legs, and kicked his rear legs high into the sky. Will sailed neatly over the pony's ears, turned a complete somersault in the air, and crashed on his back in the dirt. He picked himself up, rubbing his back. Tug stood nearby, ears up, watching him intently. Now why did you go and do a silly thing like that? The eye seemed to say. Old Bob leaned against the fence, sides heaving with laughter. Will looked at Holt. What did I do wrong? He asked. Holt ducked under the fence rails, and walked across to where Tug stood, watching the two of them expectantly. He handed the bridle back to Will, then laid one hand on his shoulder. Nothing if it was an ordinary horse, he said. But Tug has been trained to be a rangered horse. What's the difference? Will interrupted angrily, and Holt held his hand up for silence. The difference is, each horse has to be asked before a rider mounts him for the first time, said Holt. They're trained that way so they can never be stolen. Will scratched his head. I've never heard such a thing, he said. Old Bob smiled as he walked forward. Not too many folk have, he said. That's why rangered horses never get stolen. Well, said Will, what do you say to the ranger's horse before you mount him? Holt shrugged. It varies from horse to horse. Each one responds to a different request. He gestured towards the larger horse. My horse, for example, responds to the word permisi moi. Permisi moi? Will echoed. What sort of words are they? They're Glacken. They mean, will you allow me? His parents came from Glacia. You see? Will explained. Then he turned to old Bob. What are the words for Tug here, Bob? Bob screwed up his eyes, pretending that he couldn't remember. Then his face cleared. Oh, yes, I recall, he said. This son here, he needs to be asked, do you mind, before you get on his back. Do you mind? Will repeated, and Bob shook his head. Don't say it to me, youngster. Say it to the horse's ear. Feeling a little silly, and not at all sure that the others weren't having a joke at his expense, Will stepped forward and said softly into Tug's ear, Do you mind? Tug went softly. Will looked doubtfully at the two men, and Bob nodded encouragemently. Go on, climb on now. Young Tug won't harm ye now. Very carefully, Will swung himself onto the pony's shaggy back. Once again, his back still ached from the previous attempt. Yet he sat there for a moment. Nothing happened. Then he tapped his heels gently into Tug's ribs. Come on, boy, he said softly. Tug's ears twitched up, and he stepped forward at an easy walk. Still cautious, Will let him walk around the padlock once or twice, then tapped against his heels. With his heels. Tug broke out into a gentle trot. Will moved easily to the rhythm of the horse's movements, and Holt looked on approvingly. The boy was an instinctive rider. The ranger unclipped the short length of rope that held the padlock gate closed, and swung the wide gate open. Take him out, Will, he called, and see what he can really do. Obediently, Will turned the pony towards the gate, and as they passed through into the open ground beyond, tapped once more with his heels, felt the muscular little body beneath him bunch momentarily, then Tug broke out into a fast gallop. The wind rushed past Will's ears as he leaned forward over the pony's neck, encouraging him with even greater speed. Tug's ears pricked upwardly in response as he went even faster than before. He was like the wind. His short legs were a blur of motion as he carried the boy at full speed towards the edge of the trees. Gently, not sure how the pony would react, Will applied pressure to the left-hand rein. Instantly, Tug veered to the left, racing away from the trees at an angle. Will kept the gentle pressure on the reins until Tug was heading once again back towards the padlock. Will gasped in amazement as he saw how far they had come. Holt and old Bob was tiny figures in the distance now, but they grew rapidly large as Tug flew over the rough ground towards them. A fallen log loomed in front of them, and before Will could make any effort to avoid it, Tug had gathered himself, steadied, and leaped over the obstacle. Will let out a shout of excitement, and the pony whined briefly in reply. They were almost back to the padlock now, and Will pulled gently on both reins. Instantly, Tug slowed to a canter, then a trot, finally coming down to walking pace as Will maintained the pressure on the reins. He brought the pony to the standstill beside Holt. Tug tossed his shaggy hair and whined again. Will leaned forward and patted the pony on the neck. He's terrific, he said breathlessly. He's as fast as the wind. Holt nodded gravely. Perhaps not quite as fast as the wind, he said, but he can certainly cover ground. He turned to the old man. You've done well with this one, Bob. Old Bob ducked his head in appreciation and leaned forward to pat the shaggy little pony in his turn. He had spent his life breeding, training, and preparing Ranger Corps horses, and this one ranked among the best he'd seen. He'll keep that pace all day, he said fondly. Run them fat battle horses into the ground, this one will. Youngster rides him well, too, don't he? Too, Ranger, don't he? Bolt stroked his beard. Not too badly, he said. Bob was scandalized. Not too badly? You're a hard man, Ranger. Youngster sat him light as a feather through that jump. The old man looked up at the wheel, standing astride the pony, and nodded appreciation. He don't saw away at the reins like some do. Neither got a touch with the horse's soft mouth, yes. Will grinned as the old horse's trainer's praise. He sneaked a quick look at Holt, but the Ranger was grave-faced as ever. He never smiles, Will thought to himself, when he dismounted, then stopped himself hurriedly. Is there anything I should say before I get off? Bob laughed out loud. No, youngster, once said, and young Tug here will remember, as long as it's you who's riding him. Relieved, Will climbed down. He stood beside the pony, and Tug shoved him efficiently with his head. Will glanced at the apple barrel. Could I give him another? He asked. Holt nodded. Just one more, he said, but don't go making a habit of it. He'll be too fat to run if you feed him all the time. Tug snorted loudly. Apparently, he and Holt were at odds over how many apples a pony should have a day. Will spent the rest of the day getting tips on riding techniques from old Bob and learned how to look after and repair Tug's saddle and harnesses, as well as the finer points of caring for the little horse. He brushed curried the shaggy coat until it shone, and Tug seemed to appreciate his efforts. Finally worn out, his arms aching with the effort, he had slumped to his seat on the hay bale, which of course had been the exact moment when Holt walked into the stable. "Come along," he said. "No time to be lolling around doing nothing. We best get moving if we're to be home before dark." And saying so, he tossed the saddle across the back of his horse. Will didn't bother to protest that he hadn't been lolling around, as the ranger put it. For a start, he knew it would be no use, and second, he was excited by the fact that he would be riding back to Holtzlow Cottage by the edge of the forest. It seemed that the two horses were to become a permanent part of their establishment. He realized now that Holt's horse had obviously been so before, and the ranger had only been waiting until Will had shown his ability to ride and to bond with Tug before reclaiming him for his temporary home in old Bob's stable. The horses whined to each other from time to time as they trotted back through the dim green forest, for all the world as if they were carrying on their own conversations. Will bit Sorry guys, go and see something. Oh, that's good. I'm sorry. Okay. For all the world as if they were carrying on their own conversation. Will was bursting with questions he wanted to ask, but by now he was weary of the chattering too much in the ranger's presence. Finally, he could contain himself no longer. "Holt," he said experimentally. The ranger grunted. Will took that as a sign that he could continue speaking. "What's your horse's name?" the boy asked. Holt looked down at him. His horse was slightly larger than Tug, although nowhere near the size of a giant battle horse kept in the Baron's stable. "I believe it's Albert," he said. "Albert?" Will replied. "What kind of name is that?" "It's Galakan," said the ranger, obviously putting an end to the conversation. They rode a few kilometers further in silence. The sun was lower over the trees now, and their shadows were long disoriented on the ground in front of them. Will studied Tug's shadow. The pony seemed to have enormous long legs and a ridiculously short body. He wanted to call Holt's attention to it, but thought that such a frivolous observation would not impress the ranger. Instead, he summoned the courage to ask another question that had been occupying his mind for some days. "Holt," he said again. The ranger sighed briefly. "What now?" he asked. His tone definitely did not encourage further conversation. However, Will pressed on. "Remember you told me how a ranger was responsible for Mathagra's defeat?" Mm, Holt grunted. "Well, I was just wondering, what was the ranger's name?" the boy asked. "Names aren't important," Holt said. I really can't remember." "Was it you?" Will continued. "Sure that was." Holt turned that level, unsmiling gaze on him again. "I said names aren't important," he replied. There was a silence between them for some seconds. Then the ranger said, "Do you know what is important?" Will shook his head. Super is important." "Supper is important," said the ranger, "and we'll be late for it if you don't hurry." He clapped his heels into Albert's side, and the horse shot away like an arrow from Holt's own bow, leaving Will and Tug far behind in a matter of seconds. Will touched Tug's sides with his own heels, and the little pony raced off in pursuit of his bigger friend. "Come on, Tug," Will urged. "Let's show them how a real ranger horse can run." Well, guys, that's chapter 14. I think I finally got the hang of reading it so that I'm not stuttering. If I did, comment down below or like and subscribe. Thank you guys for listening to the story. See you on chapter 15. Well, guys, like and subscribe if you want more, and bye, guys. See you chapter 15.